need to continue talking a little about hemoglobin saturation of oxygen because there's different things that will impact it that we still haven't gotten to. So first off, the affinity for oxygen to bind to hemoglobin changes with the amount of hemoglobin that's bound to oxygen already. So the higher the amounts of oxygen bound to hemoglobin, the higher the affinity. So when you're looking at this, partial pressure of oxygen is under 60 millimeters of mercury of pressure. That means small changes in the partial pressure end up with large changes in the O2 saturation. We've already kind of figured that out a little bit because that's what we saw in those previous graphs in the previous video. Where if your partial pressure is above 60 millimeters of mercury, which is usually where we're kind of floating during the day typically, then large changes in partial pressure have small changes in the O2 bound to hemoglobin. So small changes in the O2 saturation. So think about what we're looking at from that 40 to the 104. Anything above 60 doesn't have much of a change as far as saturation goes. So it's all looking at the amount of oxygen already bound to hemoglobin having an impact on how much else is going to bound or stay bound or release. Now, high partial pressure of oxygen has a high saturation rate. Sure, makes sense. That's what you just said. The key thing is, oxygen likes to be stored on hemoglobin because hemoglobin tries to keep it there. Normally, hemoglobin has 4 oxygen molecules bound. By having that high saturation, it likes to maintain that high saturation. So you like to have plenty of oxygen circulating throughout your blood usually. But if the partial pressure is low, so a low partial pressure of oxygen, that results in the hemoglobin trying to drop it and release more oxygen, get it out to where it needs to go. So only about 20 to 25%, so only about a quarter, 1 out of 4, of the oxygen molecules are unloaded for one single circuit through your systemic system. So from loading up in the lungs, out to a tissue and back, at rest, typically you're only unloading 1 of the 4 stored oxygen molecules, which means you've got plenty of reserve sitting there in case you need it. And that's why if the O2 levels in the tissue drop, more oxygen will dissociate to compensate. So initially, your respiratory system, your cardiac output, they won't change. I say initially. Because think about if all of a sudden you were sitting down, you get up and walk from room to room. Does your heart rate have to jump? Do you have to start breathing heavy? Not typically, not always. I mean, it can happen if it's a big room or you're really resting, your heart rate had dropped a lot. Or it depends on a few other things that could play out. But for average, it's not going to do it. That's because the initial movement of their muscles, you had oxygen in the blood that already pulled out. And then simply stopping again and breathing normally, replace that. Now, if you keep moving, keep exercising, keep doing things, then your heart rate might increase a little more, your respiratory rate might increase a little more, because you're consistently using the oxygen, you've got to replace it. All right, so let's look at blood pH, known as the Bohr effect. In this case, high pH is going to cause a decrease in the rate of O2 release. Now, pH, we're looking at 7.35 to 7.45. That's your typical blood pH, remember. So if you're, instead of at between those numbers, you're at 7.5 or 7.6 or 7.2 or 1, we've got some problems. So high pH is going to decrease the rate of O2 release, where low pH increases the rate of O2 release. Here's what you're looking at. You see 7.2 or 7.6. 7.6 is high, your steeper curve, but the top then is even flatter, so it helps to hold on to it more. Low pH releases it a little more easily. Body temperature. Now, you really shouldn't change body temperature too much, a degree or 2 up or down. But any changes, 2, 3, 4 degrees, could alter things. So everyone has their own set body temperature, but even a degree or 2 up or down can alter how your oxygen saturation works. For example, high temperature is going to increase the rate of O2 release. Low temperature is decreasing the rate of O2 release. So take a look here. Your 38 is typical. 43 is high. You now have a shallower curve again. So you're looking at difference there, 20 degrees Celsius, which your body should never get to that point, but just for theory, you can see how it shoots up to almost 100% by the time you're at what, 45 millimeters of mercury partial pressure? So it's altering how the oxygen release is happening based on temperature. And a third thing here, the effects of biphosphoglycerate, BPG. Biphosphoglycerate now is produced in the red blood cells and the production of ATP. So your red blood cells need some energy, they produce ATP. That's a byproduct. That byproduct, if you have a high BPG, is going to increase the rate of O2 release, while low BPG decreases the rate of O2 release. So similar ideas to pH, to temperature, they all play a role in the release of O2 in your systems. And one thing to kind of an interesting comparison here is fetal versus adult. Now if you notice here, the fetal is this kind of greenish color. Notice it's a little further to the left. That's meaning that at high amounts up here, it's almost the same. But getting there, if the saturations are lower, it has a little different saturation basis there. So the same 50% saturation can actually be a little bit lower partial pressure. So it allows the oxygen to bind a little bit faster on that steeper uphill curve to start with, compared to adult systems. Just a fun little side note here. So it's all about the fetal circulation is a little bit different, obviously, than adult circulation. Based on previous videos, we talked about the different bypasses in the heart and a little bit different structure there. So a little more about the oxygen saturation curves and how different things like BPG and pH and your temperature can all impact that as far as holding on to oxygen or releasing it.